the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this, sir.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this, sir.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's
There we go. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 288. Does sample size matter? Sorry about the confusion on the time. I didn't even notice that it said 7:30 instead of 7. I think it's because we started at 7:30 1 week a while back. But the regular show time for now is 7. So, are you able to hear me? It looks like my sound is going out to everybody, but, or at least it looks in OBS like my sound is going out to everybody, but I just had Richard Bier mention that the sound isn't coming through. So, can everybody else hear me? Okay, it is going through. Richard says it's going through. Alright, good. So we'll continue. So, just to touch back on things that we've previously... I think this is 287, not 288 also. Anyway, stuff that we previously talked about. We've gone back and forth with wrestling Michael Flood's army of strawmen here. And we've noticed a few things about, his answers. Obviously, the first one is that each of his claims about MRA arguments is almost, but not quite entirely unlike what we've said. So he's not really arguing with us. He's arguing with the straw MRAs that feminists don't like to deal with. Well, they do like to deal with them. They just, they don't like to admit that we exist, right? And then, the second thing we've noticed is a lot of his answers don't even really address the straw man. They don't address anything we've said. And a lot of what he's come back with is kind of meaningless in terms of the discussion. Like how many women versus how many men are in different types of TV shows and stuff like that. It doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't have any bearing on whether or not adversity is at play when it comes to men. So the thing that he felt was the most important to deal with first was the media as man-hating. Apparently, things like filicide and intimate partner homicide are 4th and 5th on his list, and perpetration of sexual abuse, child sexual abuse is even lower on his list of how, things that are important to address. So he's really got his priorities in order as well. And we've noticed that, a lot of what he says is kind of false framing as opposed to genuine descriptions and genuine framing of something. So he's only looking at part of the picture. But be that as it may. So I wanted to get into when we're only going to do this one section that is showing in the screen, which I actually have it too high on the page because I cut off the top of the page in the screen. So women and men's homicides against children, also known as filicides, and there's a few reasons why this is important. But before I get into all that, I gotta do what I gotta do. So, let me remind you that as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justtip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And because I can't remember whether I said it or not, I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight we are wading into that flood of feminist baloney with full force. So one of the reasons that this is important to discuss and what our arguments are actually in regard to men's and women's homicides against children, the first thing about it is custody division is affected by this argument. So we discuss the rates of homicide by gender in child abuse situations and in neglect situations, because feminists use the allegation that fathers are dangerous to their children as a weapon against equally shared parenting. They used it as a weapon in the 80s against joint custody, and in the 90s against shared parenting. In the early 20th century, when we started fighting for equally shared parenting, they've used it against that. And their claim is that laws that make equally shared parenting, or any version of laws that give men basic custody rights over their children as the default in a divorce situation. So the father, unless there is a ruling against him in some way, or the parents make a different arrangement by agreeing with each other on it, the father has as much right to custody of the children as the mother does, and the father has as much right to time with the children as the mother does. And then the court should acknowledge that the children benefit as much from their relationship to each parent as the other, that it's just as important for them to have access to their father as to their mother, and to be nurtured by their father as by their mother. And it's an argument that it gets thrown in men's faces when they don't want to be fathers, but when they do want to be fathers, they get belittled, right? So there's that. And that argument has been going on now for our whole lives as Gen Xers. Like those of us that are, in mid 40s to there's some Gen Xers that are now in their early 60s, I think. That we've been hearing for our whole lives that mom good, dad bad, right? And we've been told that feminists don't do that, that they don't, that it's men's fault that they don't have custody, that they're not fighting for it and all that. But when we argue for that legislation, that's the fight back that we get. And then we get told that feminists are not fighting that fight, right? But the National Organization for Women has a documented history of arguing that paternal custody shouldn't be protected under law, because it will force judges to give custody to abusive parents, when in fact the statistics do not back that up. And in particular, the statistics on child fatalities really don't back that up. So there's that. But what Flood has to say about it, and he doesn't really get into why we make our arguments or anything. What he has to say about it is, I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we'll get into his data, because he has a link here, and we'll open it up. He says, women and men's homicides against children, in parentheses, filicides, right? And then he does his fact thing, right? Fact! Perpetrators of filicide in Australia are about 50-50 male and female. Over 2000 to 2012, of all incidents where children were killed by their parents, filicide, males comprised 52% of offenders, just over half, and females comprised 48%. His source is Brown et al., so Brown and Company and Group, filicide offenders, and then this number, and he gives this availability. So I opened it, and I'm going to switch to that. I'm sharing my screen with my colleagues. Are you guys able to still see it? Are you guys muted? You're muted again. Mike and Lauren, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we were. Yes, we were. Sorry, we're having the same mute issues as you often do.
Okay.
But yeah, you changed it to this graph.
Yeah.
Thing.
Okay. So before we look at the graph, I'm going to scroll up because there was something that I read in this earlier. When I looked at this, that data that he was talking about, I want to say, no, I'm going to stay on this. So up at the top of this, it actually says that data is just from Victoria. It's not from all of Australia. So when he says, let's see, we'll go back here. When he says of all incidents where children were killed by their parents, that's already a lie. It's that's incidents in Victoria. So
right,
there we go.
Not Australia.
Not all of Australia. so he's already falsely framing. We'll start with that, right? And he goes on to say the motivations for character and context of mothers and fathers' filicides differ, and he cites another report, which we're not going to worry about right now because the data is, like, the first set of data is, he's falsely framing that to begin with. So we look at this, and this chart is filicide victim offender relationship by victim gender and age. And the first thing I noticed about this, it's divided into 3 sections. The United States does this a little differently. Our data comes from the Health and Human Services Department from their annual child maltreatment report. And they used to have a 10-year report. I think they got rid of it because it's old, but it did cover 10 years, and it showed that there was a consistent pattern over that 10 years. And I think it's just because it was like 1998 to 2009 or something like that, and that's considered old data now because it's 2023. Although the data has still remained consistent, but they separate step parents from parents, and the HHS data does not do that. So when you see data on fathers in the HHS data from the U.S., it's fathers and stepfathers. And when you see data on mothers, it's mothers and stepmothers. It's not a separate thing. I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. So if you look at this, and he has down, differences of gender and differences of age, but when you look at the totals at the bottom, you'll see the percentages are interesting. So biological fathers, the actual genetic relationship to the child, they're actually only 29% of filicides. Well, mothers are 46% of filicides. So the data between this is with custodial fathers. Custodial fathers and custodial mothers has custodial mothers a lot higher, actually. And it's only when you get into non-custodial parents, 10% of non-custodial filicides are father-perpetrated, whereas less than 1% are mother-perpetrated. And then that they didn't divide step-parents into custodial and non-custodial, so we don't know if it's a step-parent where the mother had custody or a step-parent where the father had custody. And that the reason that that's important is, if the guy is not exposed regularly to the child, like the child only visits, the child is less likely to bond with a step-parent that they don't see very often, unless the step-parent makes an extra effort to to actually be someone that the child can trust and rely on, and who shows the child care. And so you're in a situation where if the mother isn't doing that very well, and she chooses a stepfather who isn't going to do that, then you're going to see a higher rate of filicide. And if you look at this, 14% of the filicides are represented by stepfathers. In fact, it looks here, the number is 41 stepfathers versus 82 fathers. So a third of filicides that are attributed to men are attributed to men who do not have a biological relationship with the child. Basically, you're not my real dad, right? And I think that's kind of significant. Right? And it's I don't like to perpetuate the stereotype that the stepfather is the most dangerous person to the child, because I think that's not true. But in this case, you have to recognize also the fact that, you know, the stepfather is at least more likely to not have a good relationship with the child than the father, because it's not built in. They didn't raise the child from birth. They don't have the same reason to love the child that the father has. And again, you know, the other thing is the stepfather is the person that the mother chose to replace the father with. So, in 14% of filicides, the filicide is perpetrated by an individual that the mother chose to replace the biological father with. And that's in Australia, right? So then we look at the mother. We see between the father and the mother, and custodial parents, which most of the homicides happen with custodial parents. There's 82 versus 133. So when they have custody, mothers are more likely to kill their children than fathers are. And when their custody is denied, fathers are more likely to kill their children than mothers are. At least that's the Australian data. And again, like I said, you know, with the stepfather thing, that's again, that goes back, in my opinion, in a lot of ways to the mother. And there's other things that I have my doubts on there. Like, do we know if the mother was a participant or not? Do we know if the mother is blaming the stepfather for something she did?
Right. And like, how is he being blamed when he's simply saying that I just didn't see it, when she's the one that's actually physically abusing, mentally and whatever, abusing the child?
Right.
And he's like, well, I don't know. I saw the kid and he wasn't there. You know, he's more than likely going to be the one out there working to pay some kind of bills, hopefully, maybe, you know. Is that taken into account? This is crazy.
Yeah. This is so his generalization there is kind of it's not just false framing. Like, he took that frame and twisted it so hard the sides broke.
Exactly. I mean, like, how do you go from a statement saying 50-50, but then when you look at the numbers, it's actually, oh no, not really.
Yeah. And you know, when you add in the fact that it's a difference between fathers and stepfathers is what skews the numbers. Like, and the fact that, again, who has control over who becomes a child's stepfather? It's the mother.
The mother, exactly.
Yeah. So again, when we look at that, do we count stepfather homicides, or stepfather filicides, stepfather perpetrated filicides? Do we count that as father only, or should that be counted as father and mother? Because he can't do it without gaining access based on her choices.
Exactly, and her her consent.
right? And for the viewers, that some of that data was hidden behind us, so the numbers you can see are the ones at the very bottom here where it says total. See if
I was like going crazy because you were like talking about numbers. Like, I don't see that. Where is that? And then like I looked at the Discord screen and I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, in the main show, the numbers I just highlighted down at the bottom are the ones that I was just reading off. The other thing that I noticed here is all right, so we look at male deaths, and they seem to be a little bit higher all across the board than the female deaths.
Yep.
So male children are more likely to be killed. And that's consistent. That's one thing here that's consistent with U.S. data. Now, I'm going to scroll up a little bit because I wasn't going to address this, but I am. Here's another thing. Yeah. Nope, that's not it. He had a division of filicide offender by gender. I thought I had seen filicide offender by gender with regard to the number of children, but I was wrong about that. But I did notice that versus non-indigenous, which is pretty steady, meaning people who aren't tribal in Australia, the tribal numbers are all over the place. So the data is kind of inconsistent for them, but for almost every year it's higher than. So there's a cultural difference there that isn't being taken into consideration, and it may be anything from differences in how children are disciplined to traditions that get done. Like, I don't know if how Australia is with circumcision or things like that, or tests of manhood for boys that happen. But I would bet if you looked into it and you looked at the differences in numbers here, I would bet that a lot of the issue is caused by some cultural practices that don't have anything to do with men's character and men's nature, and have a lot more to do with the expectations that are placed on how boys are raised and what they have to do to transition between boyhood and manhood.
Yeah. I'm I'm pretty curious about what the hell happened in 2009 when none of the indigenous people, they just all stopped all at once.
What can we do to repeat that? That was a good year.
Right.
Like,
so I mean that tells me that there probably might be something flawed with the reporting in this particular graph that we're looking at here, because there's just no way the non-indigenous line doesn't completely bottom out like that.
Yeah.
It just strikes me as weird, you know.
Yeah, that may have been it may have been an issue of whatever it is that is presenting a danger to children is related to some weather pattern that didn't happen in 2009 or something. You know, like they have to go do some camping thing or whatever and didn't get to, or who knows. It could be anything. I'm also relatively certain that, because I think this is on the left is percentages, not raw numbers, per capita or something along those lines, and perhaps the raw numbers are very small, and that's why this is all over the place, and the non-indigenous one is more steady. So if it's like, you know, under 10 annually or something, and one year it drops to 0, it's a much less significant change than if it's, in the dozens and it drops to 0, or if it's in the hundreds and it drops to 0. It's a much bigger drop.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, but it is interesting. It says 9 in 10 primary filicide offenders were indigenous, or were non-indigenous, sorry. So that's 89%. The non-indigenous offending rate ranged from 0.4 to 0.19 per 100,000. And the indigenous offending rate was up to 6 times the non-indigenous offending rate, depending on year, but fluctuated markedly due to the small numbers. So it's what I was thinking. Now, the other thing is, approximately equal proportions of non-indigenous offenders were male and female, which, again, I noted the stepfather issue there. Whereas nearly 2/3 of indigenous filicide offenders were male. So there is something cultural there in the relationship between children and father, and it may be that, and I don't know a whole lot about the indigenous culture in Australia, so it may be that it's, like I said, I would suspect at least things like coming of age rituals, or maybe the father is expected to do all of the discipline, maybe the disciplinary methodology is more harsh, and so on, which that's kind of a normal thing in terms of populations that are in distress or have histories of distress, rougher living, things like that, that because kids face greater dangers, discipline is more stark and it's more harsh, because you don't have time to sit and explain to the child that it shouldn't, he shouldn't play with the kitty, and the kitty doesn't want to play if the kitty is threatening to eat him instead of just scratch his leg.
Right.
So there you go. Now, looking at all of this, I want to compare it a little bit to U.S. data. Before we go into that comparison, though, I want to point some other things out. The first one is, the reason for the title, right? Let's look at the total Australia population right now. Is 25.69 million across the entire country of Australia, which is also across the entire continent of Australia. So if we look at the United States, our population is 331.9 million. So that's a much bigger sample size. And just to drive that home, if you look at, I'm going to switch to, Wikipedia is not necessarily the best source on things, but they're getting their data from census population, as opposed to wherever that source that Google had for Australia listed for the different states. So both California and Texas have larger populations as states than Australia. And Florida's not too far away, actually. So we have 2 states that are more heavily populated than the entire country of Australia. So when I look at the U.S. data, we're looking at a much bigger data set, and because we're looking at a much bigger population in general, if you look at the same percentage of the much bigger population, the raw numbers are going to be much bigger than the raw numbers in that percentage of Australian population. Because I know if I don't say all that, I'm going to point out, the stuff that I point out, and somebody's going to come along and say, well, Americans are just more likely to kill their children. And no, but there are more parents in America by far than there are in Australia. And there are probably more parents in America than the entire population of Australia, that whether they have parents, or whether they have kids or not. So nationally, we have, and this is actually not from all of the states either. This is only from 42 states. So nationally, we're looking at a national sample here of 1,381 incidents of filicide, as Australia's officials put it. Ours, it's fatal maltreatment is how it's described here, because when you kill your child, whatever you do that leads up to that death is generally abuse. I will point out, in the United States, there's a higher incidence, I think, of a death by neglect, and it more likely involves infants. So there may be some cultural differences that we're looking at here between the U.S. and Australia. I'm not familiar with the drug laws in Australia, but I do know that if you're surrounded by water and people actually have to come into a port to get into your country, it may be easier to watch your border in some ways, because it may be easier to keep people from landing on your shores anywhere. There's probably stretches of the country that, you know, have areas that it's maybe not easy or safe to land on that are less monitored. But I would wager that it's harder to create a drug problem in Australia than it has been in the United States. So that may be part of the issue, because we have deaths like here in Dayton. There was a woman named China Arnold who put her baby in the microwave, and her baby died at the hospital. And her argument for why she wasn't guilty of that murder was that she was too drunk. She couldn't have done it, right? We, during that time period, at least twice that I know of, we were listed as the heroin addict capital of the country. And so we have a lot of, it's bad enough here, the opiate problem in Dayton is bad enough here, and it's street opiates. It's not, you know, people going to pain clinics and getting medication, taking it home and overdosing on it. It's people buying heroin and fentanyl on the street. But it's the pain clinics that the prosecutors are going after, which does nothing to stop the fentanyl and heroin on the street, right? We were named the capital, I know, in I think 2014 and 2012, and I think 2012 was when the China Arnold incident happened. I might be a year off on that, but there's quite a bit of side effects from the drug problem in Dayton. For instance, if you work in a restaurant, you might have to learn how to use Narcan to save somebody from an overdose in your parking lot.
Jesus.
And it's not rare. Like, it's not something you're like, well, you know, probably that won't happen. Probably you don't have to worry about it. And there have been news stories here of restaurant workers that have actually been heading out of their shift, and there's a family, parents with their kids in the back seat, and the parents have overdosed.
Jesus
And now China Arnold, yeah, she was sentenced. She was sentenced to life, and she tried to appeal that and everything. Like, it was a long ongoing trial, but so the court didn't buy the I was too drunk, I couldn't have done it argument, but she did argue that. So it's not, I won't say that's child abuse in the United States in a nutshell, but those are factors that may or may not be different from Australia. I don't know the dynamics if Australia has an equal opiate issue. I don't think that they've been as targeted. We have been targeted for increasing the level of addiction here in the U.S. and also we've been targeted with tainted drugs and so on. Like, there's actually, I would say, chemical warfare going on here, that people aren't paying attention to. So that's one factor. Parents who are struggling with addiction to substances that really fuck you up or can kill you, that take over your whole life, that are, is not the same as parents who smoke a joint now and then, right? They're more likely to just not feed their kids. They care so little about their children that they will overdose in the parking lot of a restaurant with the kids with them in the car. And it's a reality of differences in drug use. And so, with that out of the way, I'm going to point out what you can see on the screen here. Child fatalities by relationship to their perpetrators. This is the most recent data we have. Shows that the number of single perpetrator parent-to-child murders is significantly different between the sexes.
More than double.
Yeah.
Women to men. Holy shit.
Approximately, and this is pretty consistent annually, approximately 70% of children in the United States that are killed by one parent are killed by their mother. And that's with stepfathers included in the father group and stepmothers included in the mother group. So this could be padded. We don't know how many of those 186 are biological fathers and how many are stepfathers. How many are men that the mothers chose to replace the child's biological father. Right? And we don't know how often fathers get blamed for something that the mother did. So it's a lot more likely for fathers to get blamed for something that the mother did, simply because it's assumed in cases of abuse, especially violent abuse, that the father did it. But there have been instances that have become famous, at least internet famous, where women have, in lesbian relationships in particular, have brutally beaten children to death. So there you go. In a much larger data set, like we're looking, our totals in the, dang it, down here. And our totals down here are at most a few hundred, like 223 right here is the total in Australia. So we're comparing a 223 data set to 1,381. And if you look at other perpetrators here as well, we have father only and father with non-parent. So that would be the father and the stepmother, right? No, it wouldn't be the father and the stepmother. It would be the father and another family member, like father and grandmother, father and brother, father and sister, something along those lines. Very small number here, 26, versus mother and non-parent, 152. So again, a significant difference. And then we have other stats here that are kind of weird. They don't have any listing this year for 3 parents of known sex, but they have in the past.
Wait, what?
That would be a polyamorous relationship. And then we have...
But how, though? Well, all right. Because it's still, if they're in the domicile and that person happens to be a perpetrator, all right, I get it. Okay.
Right. And then we look at non-parents, daycare providers. There's 21 of those. Right? Those are mostly women.
Mm-hmm.
And foster parents are not as high a number as I would have expected. You get into relatives that doesn't say parents, grandparents, anything. Like, it could be brothers, sisters, siblings. So
yeah, that's a pretty gray area.
Right. And that can be anything from accidental deaths. Your kids are fighting and something stupid happens. Then it could be, in any other Then we have unmarried partners of parents. So if
Wait a minute, yeah, this would have to separate out step parents then, right? If it's an unmarried. Well, unmarried.
Yeah,
Okay,
when
alright.
you marry someone, you become the step parent to their child. But if you live with them out of wedlock, you don't have any legal relationship to the child. You're just there. And that's fair because, I mean, think about how many women have a parade of uncles that, you know, that they don't, this is your new stepdad. They're like, oh, this is, you know, Uncle Bob, Uncle Ray, Uncle George. Right?
Uncle Pookie.
Yeah, Uncle
Uncle
Pookie.
Man. Uncle.
Right? So you have there's that. A lot of women will have a guy move in with them for a while and they get fed up with him and they kick him out. Right? And same thing with a lot of men will move in with a guy for a while and then they'll get fed up with him and they'll leave. You know, or a lot of guys will move in with a woman and then they'll realize that she's not the one.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I made a mistake.
I mean, I don't know how you missed all of the red flags up until that point, but okay.
She hit him all in the bathroom. It's like she's got the biggest parakeets in town, but as he goes to caress her, he sees them on the dresser. The biggest parakeets in town. So yeah, no, she hit all her red flags in the bathroom. It's like, why does she have 15 psychiatric medicine prescriptions in here? Oh, they're all for her.
Right.
You know, whatever. So that's another situation where, you know, we don't know male or female on that one. But it's more likely to happen in a situation where the parent has custody. So the unmarried partners of the parent are more likely to be the unmarried partners of the mother. Meaning, this again could be male or female live-in partners, where the mother either never got married or she was divorced. So living with the mother doesn't guarantee a child's safety. More than one non-parent perpetrator, you know, that's another one. Others, it's kind of hard to quantify that, like who constitutes others, right? But we're looking at, you know,
Holy shit, that's a big number.
Yeah, it's almost
Your
as big
mouth
as
is-
relatives. Like,
Yeah.
But of the things that we can quantify, like daycare providers is probably one of the biggest ones there. That's a mostly female-dominated profession, right? Relatives would probably be relatives that are in a caregiving position. Again, it's female-dominated. And others have no idea what the heck, because this is child maltreatment, so we're talking children who are victims of fatal abuse or neglect. And with others, it would have to be fatal abuse. And if it's not relatives, and it's not daycare providers, and it's not parents, that, you know, it's not anybody. It would have to be somebody living in the home that is not the partner of the parent, or it would have to be somebody in their life, like a teacher at school, a classmate, something like that, where some pattern of abuse has been going on that didn't get documented or didn't get reported or didn't get responded to, and then ended in the child's death.
It just boggles the mind. And then you look down and see the column that says unknown.
Yeah.
There's 48 unknown cases.
Yep. That a child has died and they haven't been able to solve the crime. Yeah. And I mean, in that situation, it could be anything. It could be, the child died under a circumstance that made it impossible to investigate. The child died, and maybe there was a medical issue, and they listed it as maltreatment, but they're not sure who is responsible.
Yeah.
Right? The child died outside the home, and under mysterious circumstances, and maltreatment is assumed, but they can't prove anything, or the parents are blaming each other, but they can't prove which one did it. The thing that I haven't gotten from these reports is who has custody in these cases. But given that mother only is 70% of children killed by one parent, our argument that he didn't address, the men's rights community's argument, has been that it is irrational and dishonest to argue that protecting the custody of fathers would subject children to more abuse and more threat of death. Because if it would, we would be seeing a different pattern in killings here. We would be seeing, more fathers killing than mothers, more male-dominated professions. They would be listing things like coaches, athletic coaches, or law enforcement. And I don't think they're going to list law enforcement here, but so that's another thing. There are cases that occur in juvie where children are abused in juvie that go into this, because juvie is another form of foster care. Juvenile detention facilities actually have a lot of abuse that takes place in them, and it has a lot of sexual abuse that takes place. And the majority of that is perpetrated by the minority of staff that are female.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, death isn't necessarily a result of that particular type of abuse, I hope. But it does lead sometimes to suicide. So, excuse me. But just so far, do you guys have anything that you wanted to point out about this?
No, in particular. I'm just. It's weird seeing the breakdown of numbers because it's basically what they're saying is 4 out of 5 times it's a parent or 1 or 2 of the parents. How they get 3, but then there's a category for 1 or more parents of unknowns.
Right.
It's really confusing how they kind of break that down, but more times than often it's the parent that will end the life of a child, and out of that it seems to be mostly the mothers that are doing it.
Yeah.
But God, the gray categories just throw me off because it's hard for me to imagine those kind of scenarios, but it just kind of all seems to stem from, well, where are the parents of that child?
Yeah.
Why are they not caring about it?
Who have they trusted to take care of their child?
Exactly.
And
does that not also count as some sort of culpability for the passing of a child if it happens in the care or the supervision of someone else when you just were either too lazy or too encumbered to do it for yourself?
Yeah, you would think it would. For instance, I have a friend who worked for a local daycare, and she was there maybe 8 months, and she ended up. This is something that happens when you're a whistleblower in these kind of industries. You report, and there are laws that are supposed to protect whistleblowers from retaliation, but it's very, very hard to prove retaliation. So when you've had a pattern of stellar reviews, managerial reviews, up until the day that you whistleblow, and then all of a sudden you're getting written up for things at work after you blow the whistle, those are things that you can't go to the government and say, well, all of a sudden I'm getting written up for everything under the sun when previously they loved me. You can't prove your pattern of behavior at work didn't change. So you can't prove that they're retaliating against you unless you can prove that you didn't do the things they're writing you up for, or that those things were okay prior to the whistleblowing, and now they're not, right? So just that's why she was only there for 8 months. But she noted several issues that were hygienic in nature, and some issues that indicated an attitude toward the children among some of the staff that was not quite malicious so much as they really didn't see them as human beings. They were objects that were there to earn them money, and any humanity they showed was an annoyance. And so that's one of the things, like, parents brought their children into that environment, and things would happen that the parents would get upset about, and they would complain to the management, and they would continue to bring their children into that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I took my kid to the daycare at the YMCA when our neighborhood had a shortage, basically, of kids his age. And I thought, oh, well, this will be a place where, because it's the YMCA, it's got a gym, it's more activity-oriented, it's family-oriented. He'll meet kids of other YMCA parents, and it'll be a different environment than most daycare, and it'll be something that we can do this, and he'll have interaction between with other kids. It turned out to be better to just regularly take him to a local McDonald's with a play place. Literally, the second week we were there, he got bullied by another kid, and the daycare staff punished him as a participant in a fight that he stood down from because he was a head taller than the other kid. He was bigger than the other kid, and he didn't think it was fair if he hit him back. And I was just like, so what you're telling me is that a child pushed my son into a corner. My son did nothing. He didn't hit him back. He didn't yell at him. He didn't act aggressive in any way. He literally had no control over the situation at all, other than his pacifist stance in the situation. And you are punishing him for getting into a fight? What did he do that constituted getting into a fight? And she described his experience of the other kids bullying as something that he had agency over. And that was the last day we were there. I was like, all right, I'm not coming back. You don't get a second chance. Like, if you're a daycare, you don't get a second chance. That's common sense, you would think, right? You don't get a second chance with my kid when you screw up like that. Obviously, this isn't the environment I thought it was. And thank goodness for McDonald's play places. Like, if there weren't going to be enough kids at the park in our neighborhood, fine, we'll go where there are going to be kids to play with. And at least at the McDonald's play place, they don't tell me that we don't allow the parents to stay here while the child is playing with the other kids. So, yeah, daycare providers, that number, I really am surprised that number is not higher. I'm glad to see that it's not higher, but I am surprised, because I've heard horror stories from daycare workers. And my own experience, even with what I thought was going to be the best daycare in the area, not good. So, that was really, honestly, all I wanted to go over tonight was Michael Flood making this out like Victoria in Australia is representative of the whole world. It is answers the men's rights complaint that actually saying that custody, protecting men's custody would subject children to more dangerous environments, that is false. By answering and saying, well, half of abusers are men, half of fatal abusers are men. Obviously, that's not entirely true.
Exactly. And, it's God, just so disgusting of him. Like, did he really think that nobody was going to open this and read it?
Yes, he thinks that he can post these links, and just by posting the links, he has won the argument.
God damn.
Yep.
I truly hope we wouldn't be the first. Not that we. Well, I guess this is publicly, calling him out for this bullshit, but not that he's listening. I wonder if anybody else has pointed that out to him, or if they're all just, oh no, thank you, no, that's a great article. Yeah, you're doing good for the fucking sisterhood.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of what he's posted there is feminist echo chamber shit, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you go back to this, he's looking at 2000 to 2012. He says all incidents, but he's looking at Victoria, just Victoria.
Exactly.
And which is even smaller than Australia's total population, right? So this goes back to, he's not the only one that I've seen doing this. His mentor, I want to say he's a student of Rayon Connell. Right, so he's really big on the whole toxic masculinity narrative. And being a student of Rayon Connell, he is going to have a overall negative view of men. Mm-hmm. And his overall negative view of men is essentially based on this idea that men's nature has this duality where if women don't feminize them out of it, they have a whole set of toxic, dangerous, and self-destructive behaviors that they'll just fall into. And the reality is, this argument that he's making here to undermine the value of paternal involvement in a child's life would increase the chances of an outcome that he and his compatriots would call toxic masculinity. Mm. Children with involved fathers are less likely to get in trouble with the law. They're less likely to have difficulty engaging with other people. They're less likely to find themselves unable to resolve conflict in a nonviolent manner. Right? Having a father in the home helps a child. Having a father in a nurturing position helps a child develop the social skills that allow them to negotiate, cooperate, collaborate, to be part of a group and not be the part of the group that disrupts everything. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. When you have a child that doesn't learn those skills, that's the individual that's more likely to have problems in the workplace where they get written up, or they get into conflict with their coworkers and they get fired, or they get sued, right? It's a person, if they don't learn those skills, they're more likely to get arrested for something, right? They're more likely to do something to get themselves arrested. They're more likely to get injured in fights with other people. They're more likely to be in a domestic violence relationship. And of course, they're more likely to be the parent that abuses their child because they can't resolve conflict. Conflict resolution is one of the single most important things you learn, social skills that you learn growing up. So really what Michael Flood is doing with this little short paragraph that seems like this innocuous, haha, well, men and women do this in equal numbers, no big deal, is very harmful to children. Really, it's threatening.
Yeah. I don't know how you could describe it as anything other than that.
Yep.
I mean, if you're showing the statistics that clearly point out the biggest boogie monster in the room, it does no one any good if you're then gonna take that information and frame it as not really, it's not that bad, just, it happens on both sides, but it's equal, because it's just not as much women. There are men that do it too, but just forget about the women part. Just know that there's enough men that do it, so we should not even think about the women do it, because
it's interesting too, because when you think about this, let's compare the men's rights argument with the feminist argument. Right? Our argument isn't that because women are the main perpetrators of fatal child abuse, they shouldn't have access to their children. We have not argued that maternal custody should be limited, or that women should be kept away from children, or that women are a threat to their children, that mothers are dangerous and have to be watched, or supervised, or anything like that. We've made none of those arguments. Our only argument is that the data doesn't back up feminists' case against fathers, right? Yep. Feminists' argument is that fathers shouldn't be allowed to nurture their children. They shouldn't have access.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. They're the only ones trying to exclude anyone from anything around here.
Right.
We're simply saying, hey, look at this. Look at this obviously true fucking information right here that you provided to us.
Right.
Ugh.
And the fact is, with all of this, and as dark as this material is, right, remember what I said in the beginning, the population of the United States is, go back to the screen, 331.9 million people. And we have, out of that whole population, we have 1,381 child fatalities. It's a very small number, and 1,109 of those are parent perpetrated, right? So we're not saying that this is a common behavior necessarily among women. Even though women are the majority of that small number, it is still a small number. It's not representative of all mothers or all fathers, or all, like, with the huge number of daycare facilities. It's not representative of daycare facilities, because it's only 21 out of the hundreds and thousands of daycare facilities all over the country. But in any case, we do point out that you can't determine custody based on, allegations that men are going to, or the assumption that men are going to abuse their children if only they have access to them. Right? That's bullshit. But that's feminist argument. And they also argue that men only want custody to reduce their child support. Now, to me, what does that argument really mean? It means we only want to retain custody for women because we want men to have to pay child support.
Exactly right.
So with that, I'm going to get into our super... We don't really have super chats, but we do have a super chow. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 288, honey for the badgers. Thanks for digging into the numbers. Attacking sample can be a weak argument. If you... not always a good argument. If the sample has good dispersion, the sample can be appropriately representative. The most manipulative way people distort the state is not breaking down the numbers. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to get into the differences between, like, I have my doubts that Australia has the drug problems that the United States has in as high numbers or high percentage of the population or as dramatically. And I doubt that it has the same relationship to child maltreatment there. Not that drug users, fucked up drug users wouldn't do the same thing anywhere. But that I think there's probably a smaller percentage of the Australian population that is in that situation.
Drugs are abnormally expensive in Australia. For reasons that might seem obvious, because they're generally imported from anywhere where they can get away with making them, and they kind of can't in Australia. So they have to import it from very far away places, and that's why it's extremely expensive, and that's why it's considered a habit of, well, the middle class. That particular kind of middle class, the champagne socialist types.
Yeah.
The average everyday working class Australian doesn't care for drugs. They're quite happy with their beer, and they're throwing a yabby on the barbie or whatever it is. And
I would say that's better anyway.
That divide is larger in Australia than it is in European or American countries, where there's all kinds of amphetamines and other members of that family of drugs just being mass produced in caravans all over the world.
I mean, we have YouTube channels dedicated to cities in this country that do nothing but show the walking zombies.
Yeah.
That are just strung out, and it seems to be endless, and there's nothing being done. There's nothing. What can you do? I mean, even outreach on the street. Well, I mean, listen. No, I mean, like on an interpersonal kind of level. You know what I mean? There's really, what can you do? You can try to do outreach. You can give people water and clothes and shelter, whatever, but it's not going to unhook you from drugs.
The really tough problem, that happens in the United States is that our population's dedication to human rights, where we have supported very vehemently, I will add, a progression of legislation and policy that prevents the state from taking away an individual's agency to make choices about their own lives. It's a double-edged sword in some ways. On the good side, it prevents the state from coming in and just taking your decision-making away because they think something is better for you. Taking away your dietary choices. Like, you have to follow the state-created food pyramid.
No
more.
No more 32-ounce sodas in the state of New York.
Yeah, it's
because that's gonna help cure obesity around here.
Well, imagine if they started arresting you for buying a second soda to get around that law.
God,
that wouldn't fly, right? But at the other end of it, it takes a lot of circumstances creating a inconvenience to the public or a danger to the individual before the state is allowed to step in and say, all right, you don't get to decide anymore. We're sending you to rehab. You don't get to decide anymore. We're sending you to a mental health facility. And that protection is important because it is the individual's right to make that choice for themselves. And it's the individual's responsibility, too, until, the individual breaks into somebody's home and tries to stab them to death. Or, tries to commit suicide by jumping in front of public transportation.
Yeah, or you live in Florida and you say a little too many spicy things and somebody decides to Baker Act you.
Well, or if you live in Florida and you try to go off-grid with your water collection and water purification system of your own, that probably would happen in Ohio, too. I hate to say it, but you can't just collect rainwater, purify it yourself, and use that as your water supply. It's illegal.
Well, because Nestle has to sell water to California.
Yeah. Well, and also the state just assumes...
call themselves a free country?
Right.
When you're literally not allowed to collect rainwater.
Right.
You're not allowed to dig up the earth and make a fucking clay pot out of it. Is it illegal?
It depends on where you're digging.
Certain plants to naturally grow on your property? Oh, wait, it is. That's weird.
Yeah, it is. It is, actually. Well, and then the other thing is... if my parents had a compost pile in their property, it was okay, legally speaking. If I got, there's a device, there are different types of this device. It's a compost tumbler. It's an enclosed device, so you don't have a pile that your neighbors have to look at. It's in a barrel that just gets turned, or there's one that's actually shaped like a giant 20-sided die. that I want that one, but I can't have that in my neighborhood. In my community, that's not legal because compost allegedly stinks. It is, on the other hand, legal to stand outside your neighbor's apartment and smoke a big fat cigar, because that doesn't allegedly stink. It's just, so laws and stuff don't make sense, right? But when it gets down to it, you can't pull somebody out of their living situation and say, I don't like the way you're living. We're going to put you in a mental health institution. You go to church every Sunday. I think that's crazy. You need to go into a mental health institution. You don't go to church ever. I think that's crazy. You need to go into a mental health institution. It has to be to the point where they've presented a danger. So if they're just wandering around on the street like a zombie, not getting enough to eat, constantly in danger of being mugged for their shit, even though they have nothing, and you can see they've got sores all over their body, they're living in fecal matter and all that, it's not enough for the state to step in and say, whether you want us to or not, we're going to help you. And that situation has led to a zombie apocalypse here in the United States. Not the kind that bites, but it's still a danger to both the zombies and the people in their neighborhoods. The dangers aren't even always obvious. Like, if you're up all night because the drug zombies in your neighborhood are fighting, and you can't sleep because of the noise, or because you're worried something's going to happen and you're waiting to call 911 when something happens that merits them showing up, then you go to drive to work the next day and you get into a car accident because your reflexes are not good, or your attention isn't where it should be. That's because of it's a cascading set of events, but it is still because of the drug problem.
You're accidentally driving over the thing that you thought was a speed bump was an actual
was a heroin
OD.
addict.
Yeah, right. It's what's crazy is that this is not in the faraway towns anymore.
Yeah,
this is San Francisco.
Yep.
And these people are trying. Some of them. Not hopefully not a whole lot. I mean, the city is not really very accustomed for raising children, but there are people who do. There are suburban communities within San Francisco that can't really do anything about it because, you know, where are they supposed to go? They spend so much money just to live there, and now all of their grocery stores are packing up and leaving because they just can't deal with it. They cannot deal with the loss, the theft, it's untenable.
Yep, and there are people that, because of their living arrangements and their job arrangements and everything, their only option for leaving California is to become homeless and start over again someplace else.
Yeah.
Like, that's a stark fact, too. And, you know, like, I've heard from people, you know, if I could afford to get out of California, I would. I can't afford to live here, but I can't afford to leave. And it's like, you don't understand that situation until you've been in it. I've been in a similar situation with a job where I was trapped in a particular scheduling pattern. And I couldn't leave that job because I couldn't get that same schedule someplace else. And it related to, you know, my ability to not put my child in childcare. So I put up with 4 years of abuse in a job because of that. In fact, I had just left that job a year prior when we started Honey Badger Radio. It's where I was working during the 7 years in hell case. And it was a hell of a situation. And it took me, just for that little issue of I need to maintain this schedule until my kid is old enough to be home alone for 30 minutes and get on the bus in the morning without me having to be there to see him get on the bus. Right? That little issue was enough that I couldn't quit that job for 4 years. It took me 4 years to get out of there. Imagine if that type of conflict would prevent you from leaving your apartment, leaving your job, leaving your custody situation, you know, and all of that, and you're stuck in some place like California. Which, again, has the highest population of any state in the country right now. So there's a lot of people that are either staying there by choice or can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in any case, I wanted to point out, again, like that, the reason I went over the drug thing, and I'm sure there's other people that can point out other differences, cultural differences between the U.S. and Australia that may also impact the numbers.
Well, I mean, it's too fucking hard.
Yeah.
Who wants to do anything? I don't know. I cannot imagine living in Australia and just having to deal with all of this shit
Yeah.
on top of it being just absolutely disgustingly humid and hot as hell, and there's no escaping it. Who wants to do drugs?
Well, hell, when we were there, it was cold, but we were there in their winter.
Yeah.
So that was different. In fact, I was not expecting it to be as cold as it was, and had to buy a jacket while I was there because I was a wimp. I'm a wimp about that.
It's a big country,
Yeah,
much like the US, except flipped upside down because it's in the southern hemisphere. The northern parts completely uninhabitable.
Yeah.
Much like the bits in the center of the country, because it's all desert.
And that's where all the fucking abos live.
Only the abos will live there. That's
yeah.
But
The only one's tough enough to live there.
we visited Melbourne and Sydney, which are by far the most populous places there, and the most southern places there, which is probably not a coincidence. It's that Goldilocks zone of sort of lush vegetation where people typically live, and I guess that's why we're getting these statistics from Melbourne, because it's the most metropolitan place in Australia, and it's the most feminized place in Australia, and like in any other Western country. I know I'm referring to Australia as a Western country, and that's weird. We don't know how that works.
Well, I think ideological.
Yeah.
Yes, they are Western. They're not.
West isn't a descriptive term.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
an ideological term, and it includes Australia, but not South America.
Well, it's because
some
there's
reason.
a lot more influence of Western Europe on Australia than on South America.
Mm-hmm.
I think the West just means anglicized countries,
Basically.
not even Hispanicized countries, if that's even a word.
So, but yeah, the only other thing I would say when we were in Australia, like we started out at the Gold Coast, then went to visit Sydney and Melbourne. But every place we went, it seems like we were the fattest people there. It's just like, if we lived there, it probably would be different, just because every place we went, people were walking. They were out walking, and that was nice. So I hate to see feminists representing Australia, because it's actually a really nice place. Even with the spiders and crocodiles, which I didn't see any of the famous Australia spiders. I was disappointed. I saw a daddy longleg. I can see those here, But yeah, all the scary creatures that live there. Of all of Australia's terrifying wildlife, I think feminists are the scariest.
Yeah,
they're the deadliest.
Australia is awesome. Australian people are awesome. The Australian media is shite. It's a bunch of hawks and vultures, just like in any other country.
Area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah. I just, as far as the material goes, don't think that Flood's beliefs and attitudes about this are necessarily representative of the entire country, because there's plenty of MRAs from Australia as well.
And why?
Some really great ones.
I'm curious as to why he chose Australia or this specific set of statistics to highlight.
I think that's where he lives.
Oh,
I think he's Australian. Like, you usually use your own nation's statistics. So I get statistics from the UK from UK feminists, and I get statistics from the United States from US feminists, and I get statistics from Australia from Australian feminists. So that's in Indian feminists, what I get from Indian feminists is usually vitriol and cuss words, and some of them are in Hindi, and I don't understand what they said, other than the fact that the tone of voice and timbre, if they're verbal and not typing, or the fact that they say it in all caps when they're typing, indicates that they are mad. Ho's mad. So, just, like, I almost would rather deal with Australian feminists than Indian feminists. Holy crap. Like, our buddies from India are unbelievably, like,
it's
balls
like
the size of Texas to deal with those women.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is like night and day.
Yeah.
Because the Indian women are just, I mean, the pedestal that they're on. Holy hell. I don't know if they will ever be able to be knocked down from it, but it is really bad, especially what they do to the men and the families of men in India, because it's never just the man who is targeted and then punished for just, the most ridiculous of claims, whether they be true or false, and a lot of them I believe are false. We hear a lot about like the fake rape cases, and when that happens, they don't just take the man down, they will take down the whole family.
Oh yeah. And I remember reading about a case where a family was arrested on dowry abuse allegations, and they had a 90-day-old baby in that cell with that family. The allegations, the subjects of the allegations included allegations against the 90-day-old baby. I guess maybe for crying too aggressively or what, you know. And they arrested the mother and baby together. I'm just like, how do you accuse a baby of abuse? You know, and then again, I talked to American abortion advocates, and I realized that does happen. So
yeah,
but with that, I think
kill it and everything it loves.
Yeah, I think we get into another subject there that you know, when we talk about a subject like filicide, the stats we look at, we are only looking at what people are doing to children who have been born.
Right.
I recently got into an argument with a chick on the topic of abortion. And, I mean...
Again?
This is this is not a person that I really took all that seriously to begin with, because she has crack as part of her name. So I thought, oh, this is a troll. But then, the more that I talked to her, the more I realized, no, this woman is 100% serious about everything she's saying, and she means it. She's just really stupid.
Yeah.
And I'm not being facetious when I say that. This woman, I asked her, because she didn't seem to understand, and this is a fundamental thing with pro-aborts, female pro-aborts from America in particular. They don't know the difference between a gamete, which is your reproductive cells that are not fully formed living human organisms, that if nothing happens with them, they will die, right? If they don't serve their purpose as a cell and fertilize a gamete from another individual, they will die. And they'll be sloughed off like any other cell. So your skin cells do that, your hair cells do that. In fact, your hair is dead. Any hair that you can see is dead. So I have right now 2 feet of dead hair hanging from my head because I cut a foot of it off. But yeah, so that's a cell. She doesn't know the difference between that and a zygote.
Good Lord.
Which is a combined set of gametes that has created fertilization, that has conceived, and that when it implants, you know, successfully, will develop for the rest of its life along every stage of human development before it dies. And that's a fully formed living human organism at its earliest stage in life. And she couldn't understand that. And I went on with her, right, continuing to discuss and trying to get her to understand the difference. And I finally said something about, you know, well, do you think your hair is an organism? She's like, your hair is dead, you know. And I'm like, okay, what about your fingertips? Are your fingertips organisms? And she said, yes. So she doesn't understand what an organism is. But this woman held up a case to me. It's a recent case of a woman whose baby has a very tragic disorder of a bad copy of a particular gene that causes, in most cases, it causes early death. And on the way to early death, it also causes a whole set of other medical issues and intellectual disability. So it's a very tragic situation. The baby is doomed before birth, and it sucks, right? And Texas law doesn't allow an abortion in that circumstance because the pregnancy does not abnormally threaten the mother's life. She's not more at risk than any other healthy pregnancy of dying from complications of the pregnancy. And feminists like to argue that pregnancy is very dangerous because any woman can die from pregnancy complications. But actually, it's like, at the highest I've seen it in the United States is something like 77 women out of 300,000. So that's bullshit. It's more dangerous for you to drive your car. than it is. So this Texas case, and they do this, they always want to exploit tragedy, right? But it wasn't a case where it was valid for the mother to say, well, it's a threat to my life, I need an abortion, right? It's not valid. What she was arguing was to preserve her fertility. She wanted to have an abortion, even though they were past 20 weeks. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. Past 20 weeks, they can't just do a simple D&E. They can't just suck the baby out. They actually have to. It's there's a video on YouTube with a medical professional who describes this process exactly in very clinical terms. And even in the most clinical terms that he can describe it, it is gruesome. It is a gruesome procedure. And the risks of this gruesome procedure, which is done on a pain-capable infant in utero, a pain-capable fetus, it's can cause perforation of the uterus, can cause sepsis, could cause a bunch of whole other issues that actually are a bigger threat to her future fertility than having to wait until the end of this gestation period, and then try again. And I don't know how the case came out. Aboda, I think the case that you're asking about is the case I'm talking about. But I got into an argument with this woman about, what different options this woman has and what the actual situation, the actual threat versus what she's saying is. And none of it was relevant to her. It was just her being, well, it's okay to kill this baby. It's okay. And she was perfectly all right with the brutality of that type of abortion, which should never be done. Honestly, by the time you're that far along, there are other options, other things that can be done. And, heck, I think 2 weeks later the baby would be at the age of the youngest surviving preemie delivery. Where they could just have the mother deliver the baby and, do comfort care. But yeah, she cared more about herself and her situation, and this woman was exploiting her situation to argue that a woman who just decided 20 weeks into her pregnancy that she didn't want to be a mother should be able to do the same thing. So here we are talking about who kills the most children. Right. So
oh my god, it makes me so fucking mad because we talk about the fact that it happened.
Yeah.
What we don't really talk about is the why.
Yeah.
And I wholeheartedly believe that a lot of times it's because the mother just it's too much of an inconvenience for her because she's this child is a reminder of a failed relationship. Okay, so it's just very easy for her to clean up the books, I guess, so to speak. Let's just clean that chapter off of my life and move forward.
Yeah.
And
so just to compare.
I hate this topic. I hate this fucking topic.
I know, I hate it too. But this topic was actually my foray into human rights activism. But in the United States, in 2021, there were a total of 622,108 abortions reported from 47 states. More than 500,000 the abortion ratio is 204 abortions per 1,000 live births, or approximately 1 in 5.
But Hannah, that's just health care.
Yeah, that is women killing their babies. So when we talk about this, we're talking about a situation of we, as a society, accept filicide in utero as a medical choice. Right. I don't personally, but as a society, we do. And these statistics, like I've looked at the CDC's surveillance statistics before. Approximately 3% of abortions are done for reasons that would be considered at all medical. Like any kind of healthcare concern or consideration. The other 97% are all social reasons and economic reasons that could easily be handled in other ways. You can put the child up for adoption. The father could have custody. If the father doesn't want custody and you don't want to go for adoption, there's safe haven abandonment. There's other family members. There's, maybe not getting pregnant in the first place, but since we're dealing with pregnancy, right? Then it's too late to not get pregnant. But in any case, that means that approximately 97% of this 622,108 number is women who killed babies because they felt that it was easier for them to just kill the baby than to give birth and go through a legal process in order to achieve their economic or social goal for which they were killing the baby.
But it's not a baby; it's just a fucking clump of cells. And when I'm not gonna be able to fit into the fucking pants that I just bought because oh my god, now I hate these people.
Yeah.
Fuck, I hate them. I hate them.
But the argument,
convenience. Lauren has now left the room. In something of what one might call a huff.
I feel for her. I understand. Like I said, I've been arguing this since I was 13. So it's been a while. There isn't an argument that anyone can make in regard to abortion that I can't answer. Right? There's not one that I haven't heard some variation on.
It's a hot girl summer. Oh no, I can't have no. Oh my god, just the litany of excuses.
Yeah. Because
I just want to go out and be a hoe. Oh my god, it really. But we're the people that don't. We hate women. We hate women because we actually criticize the fucking things that they do and say, hey, maybe, bitch, you're wrong every once in a while.
Maybe have some agency. Maybe, and the worst part for the mothers that do this, in their experience, the worst part is going to be how they feel about it 20 years later. How they feel about it when they're home alone and they don't have anybody to make excuses to or impress.
Yeah, but the thing is that no one will ever talk to those women, right?
Well, we can't.
We won't ever hear from them.
There will be 1 or 2% that comes out and says, "I regret this," right? But most of them won't admit it. Women don't like admitting when they regret their choices.
They can't even fucking admit when they do something wrong. What do you mean regret?
Like
regret. You have to acknowledge that you fucking did something wrong.
I get treated as a weirdo for that, and other women treat it as a win when I can admit, like, there are things I did in high school that I regret to this day. because they put me in a lot of danger and changed the course of my life economically, and may have had bad effects on other people's lives because I didn't stop them from doing something stupid. Like theirs. You should be able to admit that because it means you've learned something, right? And you're not going to make that mistake again. Learning and growing is vital to being an adult. And if you can't learn and grow, you can't be an adult. Like, that's just fundamental. I don't know how women don't get that. But from what I've seen, when I run into the older a woman is when I'm talking to her about this subject, and she admits at some point in the discussion that she's actually a consumer at some point from this industry in her life, that when she was younger she had an abortion, or she has taken her daughter to have an abortion, is another one. That happens, that comes up. And, if my daughter had to raise that child, blah, blah, blah. There are ways that people talk to you about things that, when they're constantly making excuses for why they don't feel bad about doing something. I don't feel bad about it at all. I'm fine with it. It's not a problem. You feel bad about, I don't feel bad about it, blah, blah, blah. They feel bad about it. Mm-hmm. If they have to tell you, if they have to shout their abortion, it's because they know they did something wrong.
Yeah.
And behind the closed door of their eyelids, they're beating the shit out of themselves for it.
Yep.
Right? And they're going to do it for the rest of their lives. And they'll never get over it. Some of them have a mild form of PTSD from it. I've run into that as well, where there are things that trigger memories from being in the clinic, going through the experience for the rest of their lives. I've seen women actually get upset and have to leave the room because another mother is nursing a baby. And, when you go talk to her, are you okay? What's going on? I don't have anything against nursing. Okay, I didn't say you did. You just didn't look happy. Did something happen? Did you get a bad text? It's like anything I can help with. I'm fine. If you talk long enough, you find out that it's just bringing back some bad memories, and then you find out that, there was an abortion. I don't regret it, but it just doesn't make me happy to look at that.
Yeah. You can always tell. You can always tell when people give answers to questions that they were never asked.
Yeah. And it's heartbreaking. It's not as heartbreaking as what the baby went through, but it's still heartbreaking. Right. And it's not, we're not allowed to talk about that. These women don't have a chance at recovery because the women who run the abortion industry and who are activists want to exploit them as evidence that the problem doesn't exist. Right? So while we talk about custody and the question of whether the allegation that fathers are overtly abusive and the stats, whether the stats back that allegation up, whether it's valid and whether it's a relevant part of the discussion as to whose custody rights are deserving of being protected and whose are not, where, we would argue that every parent's custody rights are deserving of being protected in the most basic terms, and that, you shouldn't start taking away from that until there is actual evidence that the parent is a danger to the child. Right? When we start talking about that, we're talking about it in terms of things done to children that have already been born. Mm-hmm. And it totally excludes the entire body of things done to children before they were born, because that's just abortion. I haven't even gotten into fetal alcohol syndrome and birth injuries that are caused by drug use during gestation. Right? Birth injuries that are caused by failure to obtain medical care or good nutrition when it's available. or other foolish things that mothers have done. Like that, there's a shitload of questions in regard to, do female abusers ever represent a much smaller number than male abusers? Because the truth is, we're only looking at a small percentage of them.
Mm-hmm.
We got another super chow. Anonymous gives us $5 and says, Hannah, have you seen the video? Oh, yeah. The video of that woman who survived being aborted. Her face was totally disfigured. She did an interview with her mom, and you can see her mom deeply regrets doing that, but her daughter still defended abortion. I was sickened. Yeah.
Oh, holy shit!
Yeah, that one when, like, you can't hear that woman talk without crying. And there are other abortion survivors that I've heard as well. So there's different types of abortion. If I remember right, that one was a survivor of a saline abortion. And that's the one that the most chance that a baby will survive an abortion is you have the early abortions where it's a very simple procedure because the development of the zygote is so not far along that they just literally just suck it out with a medical piece of medical equipment that's like a vacuum, and they dilate the cervix and suck it out, and they scrape the inside of the uterus to get the placenta off, and that's that, right? And prior to that, when it's the first few weeks, they give you a pill and you have a miscarriage. But when you get into later, between the age of saline abortion and that, they dismember the baby. So those aren't survivable abortions. They dismember the baby and they crush its head before pulling everything out. And then the doctor has to put all the parts back together to make sure they got the whole baby.
But you know what's completely unacceptable, Hannah? Just absolutely verboten. Financial abortion.
Oh yeah. Well,
God forbid a man says there's a child here that I didn't ask to be born, and here it is. And I guess there's arguments to be said about no, there's really not. Because
there's really not.
There's really not.
Financial silence is physical violence.
Right.
Yeah.
If you don't agree to pay for this child, then you might as well be scooping its brains out and scooping its whole body into a medical bag and throwing it into a bin full of medical waste.
Right.
That's what you're doing, and it's definitely not what we're doing. Ha 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 ha! Life is great when you can flip reality on its head whenever you like.
Right.
But we're the terrorists.
We're the terrorists.
We're the terrorists.
So the woman who survived the abortion probably survived a procedure that they did at a later stage than the one where they dismember the child and pull out the parts. And that's usually the saline one, where they inject a saline solution into the uterus that is a strong enough saline solution that it essentially burns the baby to death and induce a miscarriage. And sometimes in that situation, they also have to crush the baby's head for the baby to be able to get out. And probably because of the intentions, they probably injured that baby in the process. But there are state laws in place that feminists are objecting to this too, because they think it takes away women's right to health care. It is considered health care by feminists if a baby is born alive from an abortion like this, a baby survives an abortion like this, some states have laws in place that you must provide care for the baby, and in case that the baby can survive and grow and get to live a life. And feminists have argued that they have to kill that baby for the woman's health. Baby's not in her body anymore, not part of her body. Her health has no effects whatsoever from anything that happens to that baby. The baby could be turned over at that point to the hospital, because hospitals are safe haven abandonment centers. Right, so you can abandon the baby right then and there. Of course, abortion clinics probably aren't. But I mean, they just take that baby right off to a hospital, and the mother just doesn't claim the baby. The mother says, I am abandoning this child. That's it. Her health is taken care of at that point. She has nothing else to do with the child. But feminists object to that. Just think about that for a minute. But they're mad that fathers might get custody of their children because abuse.
Exactly.
So,
I was gonna say, you went a little bit robo, but I was gonna say, Planned Parenthood. I'm not sure if they know what to do with fully cooked pizza. I think they only understand how to slice it up.
Well, and of course, after you put the ingredients all together, and you put it in the oven, it's not a pizza until you take it out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and all of the ingredients individually are pizzas. Oh, God. So, with that, I think I will say, Mr. Flood, you have failed to take into consideration a great deal of information, details that are related to this issue. And I'm sure you probably would disagree strongly with me that abortion has anything to do with this issue. Because you're a feminist, and feminists do not accept the fact that abortion involves killing a human life. But it does. And it is an exclusively female behavior. Right? Even when the abortionist is male, it's the mother who has taken her happy ass in there to have her baby killed. She is paying a hitman to assassinate her child. Right? So, in my opinion, it is an egregious lie. That tiny little paragraph contains more lie in it than everything you wrote before it. You fucking asshole. This is why I have you blocked on Twitter, you dipshit.
If Michael Flood had a jar for every time that he failed, he'd be more rich than Alex Jones.
Oh, jeez. He'd be living in a hoarder house of jars.
He does, though. Feminists do have a jar for every time they fail.
Yeah.
The main source of income is the failing upwards jar.
Yeah, basically.
It doesn't matter how much they failed. They get paid for failing. That's the only reason they exist. It's not unironic that he's called Flood.
Jeez.
That's what this is. It's a fucking flood. And we're all drowning.
Sewage.
Yep. So we got one more super chat. We got one more super chow. No super chats. No super chats for you. And then I'm gonna close it out. Because I think I've made the point with regard to abortion's relationship to this, and I think we made a lot of headway in discussing the subject. Richard Beer gave us $5 and said there was a Mother Jones article. That's your first problem, reading Mother Jones. But there was a Mother Jones article written by a woman who had a saline abortion, and she had a childless couple as friends who desperately wanted a baby and offered incentives for her to carry the baby to term, but she refused. In the article, she mentioned her feelings of joy feeling the baby thrashing in response to the chemical. And yeah, that's pretty much, in a nutshell, like, we get told all the time that these late-term abortions only happen when the mother is in sepsis because the baby is already dead and they can't get the baby out, and and so on. But saline abortions are done on late-term pregnancies, where the mother can give birth without there being a threat to her health, but she doesn't want the baby. And that's really evil. So, with that, we will close out the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This has probably been the most toxic sausage that we've had to discuss. One of the most toxic sausages that we've had to discuss on this show. But thanks for listening to the rancid sausage. Thanks to my two co-hosts for going through the information with me and everything, and all your comments. And
yeah, next week, can we pretty please not talk about?
Next week, actually, next week we won't be talking about anything. I forgot to mention that. I am
Christmas. That's right. It's bloody Christmas next week.
Already?
Yeah,
kind of.
I am assisting a person with disabilities next week, and will be unavailable on Thursday, and so that's there won't be a show. So, in fact, that's not next week. That's 2 weeks from now. So next week we will have, because it'll be the Thursday before Christmas. So next week we will have a show. I'll try to find something not Michael Flood to do next week, just because I obviously you guys need a break after this. The next thing we are going to discuss is partner abuse, as Michael Flood has made that one of his issues, and of course his statistics are only about homicides, and they're only from Australia, and I'm going to go off on that as well. But I don't want to talk about that next week either. So I'll find something else that we can talk about next week. And with that, thanks, like I said, to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.